The Federal Reserve is on a mission to cut interest rates, and they really are trying to make up for some lost time. Now, I happen to be very worried about inflation, and that's sort of my shtick. I am concerned that the Fed has kind of allowed this thing to be a little bit too choppy. In other words, there was an opportunity way back when to stop with the money printing, and they didn't do it. I mean, for goodness sakes. When you've got Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer pushing through the largest spending program, which they ironically called the Inflation Reduction Act, you've ever seen, you probably shouldn't have your Fed out printing and printing and printing and printing. And so they have paid the price. We've all paid the price. You know what the grocery bills look like. You know how hard this is. And the Fed is struggling because you know what, the economy's not doing so great, but you've got all this rising inflation. What does that mean? You're running the risk of stagflation. So they're trying to help Kamala. They're trying to even things out. They probably should have done something earlier, but they didn't. So now they're panicking. Now they have to do something, and they have to do something big. So in order to do something big, they're coming through with 50 basis points. That's a half point. So that's good. Like, interest rates should go down. But is it going to actually cause more inflation? I think that's a real question right now. Indeed, a real question. Let's go to Powell.
Our restrictive monetary policy has helped restore the balance between aggregate supply and demand, easing inflationary pressures and ensuring that inflation expectations remain well anchored. Our patient approach over the past year has paid dividends. Inflation is now much closer to our objective, and we have gained greater confidence that inflation is moving sustainably toward 2%. As inflation has declined and the labor market has cooled, the upside risks to inflation have diminished and the downside risks to employment have increased. We now see the risks to achieving our employment and inflation goals as roughly in balance, and we are attentive to the risks to both sides of our dual mandate. In light of the progress on inflation and the balance of risks, at today's meeting, the committee decided to lower the target range for the federal funds rate by a half percentage point to 4.75% to 5%. This recalibration of our policy stance will help maintain the strength of the economy and the labor market, and will continue to enable further progress on inflation as we begin the process of moving toward a more neutral stance. We are not on any preset course. We will continue to make our decisions meeting by meeting. We know that reducing policy restraint too quickly could hinder progress on inflation. At the same time, reducing restraint too slowly could unduly weaken economic activity and employment. In considering additional adjustments to the target range for the federal funds rate, the committee will carefully assess incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks.
Oh, of course. Okay. So they want to have their cake and eat it too. But they never can. I mean, and ultimately, we can go back in history and look at all their mistakes. But even if you just take the Fed out of it for a moment and you just look at the debt levels we have, they're pretty extraordinary. You look around the world and you see how so many players around the world are trying to diversify out of U.S. interests. It puts pressure, if you would, on interest rates. So even if the Fed is doing this, the fact that we have 35 trillion and still counting in debt, it means that there is a tendency for those interest rates to go higher, because basically you got to offer a little something more in return. Anyway, I think bottom line, you are looking at an inflationary scenario for the long term, like for the future. And this is one of the reasons why you should probably be diversifying. One of the best diversification tools you can look at is actually gold, because it's the one thing that's like held its value, right? If you look at gold versus the money supply, I've got a great chart. I'm going to have to dig that one out for you guys. What you actually see is that right about now, you've got the sort of proper valuation. So if you look at a time like right before gold really, really tanked, you got to go back some time, you saw that the money supply was nowhere near what gold prices were. And then that started to shift maybe in '08. And I think, people were nervous, and then you had all this money supply coming on, and that all sort of came back into being. And I think that's just an interesting data point to take a look at. If you're interested in investing in gold, you know who to call. Go to trishlovesgold.com or just text Trish, my name, to 65532, 65532. You can also call American Heart for Gold at 844-495-1115, one of the great sponsors of the Trish Regan Show. So we love them for that. Remember, subscribe, share, like, all that good stuff. You know, as you think about this economic policy, though, it's really kind of amazing what a bad job Kamala and Joe really did. I mean, you can't make it up. It's like that Seinfeld episode where George Costanza's like, hey, you know, I'm going to just do the opposite of everything. That's what Biden and Kamala really needed to do. Every time they had an instinct to do something, they should have done exactly the opposite. And that's certainly what Anthony Blinken should have done for years. Remember John McCain saying how dangerous he was because he was so bad at his job that every instinct he had was absolutely wrong. That's our Secretary of State. Thank you very much. And has been a long time Biden advisor. What do you know? Anyway, we've got really bad policies, and their only answer to this, oh my gosh, Project 25. You know, it's Donald Trump and Project 2025. Project 2025 is actually pretty decent. Like, the Democrats, if they were smart, would adopt Project 2025. Trump actually has nothing apparently really to do with it, other than maybe some of the ideas actually have been generated for some of the things that he said, because it seemed to kind of line up, right? Like, you can get rid of the deep state. You got to give equal access to education. We need to make sure that we have more market discipline in the education field, if you would, so that little kids, if their parents so desire, have an opportunity to go to a better school, not just get stuck with the teachers union in podunk who knows where the teachers don't want to work, but they get the union ties and they just pass these kids along. I've seen it myself. In New York City, I did a story on this years ago. I couldn't believe that kids were graduating from high school and couldn't read. Literally could not read. Well, how could you get beyond third grade and not be able to read? And it was explained to me that they just keep passing them through the system because no teacher wants to deal with them the following year. So they just pass them along. That's not working. We need more accountability for education in terms of energy, right? Don't we need to be able to open up all our energy markets? You can get all this information yourself. You know, it's not hidden. That's what cracks me up. Oh, it's this hidden clandestine thing from conservatives. Heritage Foundation is behind it. I'm going to put it on the screen for you. 25truth.com. Just go there, check it out. You can see it right there, 25truth.com. I mean, I actually agree with pretty much everything that they're saying. There's nothing I actually don't agree with there. So I'm like, guys, like, you know, if you're going to pick a boogeyman, you'd think you could pick something just a little bit better. Maybe, could you? Well, no, they're not that smart, you see, and that is indeed such a big part of this problem right now.